Milton Bradley might not be a name that you're real familiar with, but probably you know some of the games. Life, Clue, Yahtzee, Battleship, games we probably played when we were kids.
Battleship! Battleship! Battleship, Milton Bradley's great game of strategy. It's loaded with action and suspense. Play it anytime, anywhere.
B4, hit. J1, commit. J10. Oh, you struck my battleship.
Battleship, a game of strategy from Milton Bradley.
Well, Milton Bradley didn't just come up with games. He actually wanted to help do some educational things for students, so he came up with a new kind of, not really a game, but it was used primarily for elementary students to learn a little something.
And it's called a historiscope, and we have one right here. This is from a little bit after the Civil War era, but what it is actually inside of it, you have a scroll, and on that scroll are a whole bunch of pictures, different scenes from the Civil War, from various historical events, because he thought that the way that you teach children is by telling them stories about the heroes, the villains of the past, things that get them interested, inspired, cautionary tales sometimes, all sorts of stories, and they had tons of these different historiscopes. In fact, you could go to the store sometimes and pick up different scrolls, swap them out depending on what you're covering in school, or if this is kind of a game, you could have some at your house even. But these were designed in order to teach children the lessons of the history through stories.
And one of the things certainly lost today is a lot of the story about who America is, where we came from, who are the heroes, even who the villains are. Today, sometimes we celebrate people that really shouldn't be celebrated, and we villainize people that should be the heroes, largely because we don't know the story anymore. In fact, if you think of George Washington, the most famous story about George Washington, I'm giving you a second, think about it, what would that be?
Cherry tree.
Cherry tree, right? He chopped down a cherry tree. That's not even a real story. The very first biographer of George Washington, right after Washington's death, wanted to tell a story about how honest and how truthful Washington was as a man. So he made up this story about how, even when he's a kid, and who chopped down this tree.
He made up a story about truthfulness?
It seems a little ironic, right? We're not even telling a real story about how honest he was, but the point is, this story stuck, but the story that people know today isn't even the true story of George Washington. And this is the problem with a lot of history, is a lot of the things we think we know are not what actually happened, which is one of the cool things about this game. It would show images, and this is a Civil War scroll, so images from different battlefields, different generals, and different leaders from the Civil War, and you learn their story. Today, we really don't know stories very well anymore. If you want to know more about American history, we'd encourage you to check out WallBuilders.com, where we try to go back and tell a lot of the original stories, who the heroes, who the villains were. It's not just what some professor or Wikipedia says, right? It's what actually happened, which is why we try to always go to the original source. To find out more, go to WallBuilders.com.